The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
From the counteroffensive in Ukraine, all the way to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and Brett Favre's usage of welfare money. So much has happened since last we spoke. Today is Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's episode is going to be jammed packed. I want to start at the beginning by thanking all of our newest patrons. We will have a patron party in the middle of today's episode. It's been a while since we've done that, but thank you to all the people who have joined on to support our efforts organizing against Christian nationalism. And while I've been away, I've had a chance to speak with so many pastors and to bring to their attention the threat, or even to just compare notes, because quite a few pastors are keenly aware of the threat that Christian nationalism poses not only to this country, but to any version of Christianity that does not comply with MAGA ideologies, with the ideology of white supremacy. And so I want to give you an update on what's happening on that front. But I also want to bring attention to what's going on in Ukraine with the counteroffensive, particularly how, as it pertains to the role of propaganda in the United States. I also want to take us to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, to discuss Brett Favre and the revelation that welfare money that was allocated for welfare was funneled to his daughter's college institution for a new volleyball stadium. We'll talk about that and so much more in today's episode. But I want to begin with this clip from Right Wing Watch. I suggest that you follow them on Twitter because so much they invest a lot of time into watching all of these nationalist pastors. And this next clip I'm going to play for you is from Lance Wallnau. He is frustrated. I mean, he is upset with the fact that they are being labeled Christian nationalists, and that term is now being taken as a negative. I like to think we had a little bit of something to do with that. Take a listen in.
They're attacking everyone who is a Christian in politics as a Christian nationalist. All the Christians are pearl-clutching and hand-wringing about Christian nationalism. All the nervous, religious types are all warning me, Lance, don't use the term Christian nationalist. This just makes me so mad. I feel like coming out as a Christian nationalist because the devil controls, like the rainbow. The rainbow used to be in the Bible, a sign from God of his covenant that would never destroy. Then the LGBTQ movement got a hold of it. And now if you put a rainbow on something, are you LGBTQ? It's like the devil grabs stuff and brands it. It makes me so mad. I'm not willing to let Christianity and the nation or nationalism or love of nation be destroyed by the left, who's like an ubiquitous force, they're like a virus.
He's given the left far more credit than we deserved right now. We are not a ubiquitous force. In many cases, we're a force of one, standing against the ideology of Christian nationalism. But I like the sound of this video because it represents to me the fact that his own listeners, his own parishioners. Now, this is a Republican operative who identifies as a Christian nationalist, and he is currently organizing a fundraiser with the likes of Donald Trump Jr. And I like this clip because it lets me know that the negative connotation that should be applied to Christian nationalism is starting to resonate enough to become a nuisance to the people who thought that they could just run around the country and say that they wanted to be the whitest supremacist version of Christian and expect us to simply accept that because they feel they can get away with anything because they're Christian. That has been the MO of white evangelical Christianity in this country since its founding, but certainly in this renaissance of white supremacy that we're living under because of Donald Trump and because of the level of sheer ignorance that is fomented to the top. We're at a stage now where they've jumped the shark. They've allowed people like Marjorie Taylor Greene to confess their true intentions when she came out and said she believes that all Christians, all of America should be Christian nationalists. And now the negative connotation is seeping down into the mindset and the thinking of their own supporters. And that's critical because if we don't challenge, if we never put up a challenge to a particular idea, if we don't push back against a particular movement, one that we know is detrimental not only to all of humanity, it is detrimental to this nation, it's detrimental to each and every one of us as individuals. If we don't push back against it vocally, and with everything that we have, then people will believe that it is okay. There are some people who are in the midst of the Christian community who, if we didn't bring attention to and continue to, the work is not done. If we do not continue to bring attention to the threat that this virulent strand of Christianity poses to every single one of us, then they would simply go along with it as if everything is okay and nothing is wrong. It's almost like when you finally get someone to see themselves in the mirror for the first time. You know, have you ever been in a conversation where someone simply cannot see themselves, but you finally get a chance to say something that reflects the negative thing that they've been doing back to their eyes, and they can absorb for a second that perhaps they are wrong? But the problem is if we don't speak up in a organized fashion, then there are going to be millions of Americans across this country who would have thought, and still today, because the work is not finished, who would think that nationalism, Christian nationalism, is okay. If no one speaks up against an idea, then there are going to be so many people whose days are so full, so busy, that they don't have the time to break these things down. People will go along with an idea based on an appeal to the masses. If there's enough people going along with something and they have not had time to do the genuinely dig down into the logical arguments and the fallacies, we have a tendency to go along. This is not to say that people aren't capable of figuring it out. It's to say that, quite frankly, in America, you don't have enough time to figure it out. And maybe your gut instinct has told you all along that something was wrong. Let me give you another example besides Christian nationalism, because for a lot of my listeners, that was a clear thing for you. You knew it immediately when you heard it. You knew that that was a problem. But in the American left, there has been an ongoing, persistent problem of a faction trying to align the left with MAGA, with Republicans, with conservatives who certainly do not have the vision for the future that we have. And that has been happening since 2015. And me and my team specifically, we have relentlessly pushed back against it since 2015. And I bring that up because if there is no opposition to an idea, specifically an idea that is damaging and detrimental, if there is no vocal and organized opposition to it, that many more people will fall prey to it. I'll be talking a little bit more in this episode about hashtag MAGA communists. Make America Great, Donald Trump brand communist. It literally makes no ideological sense, but that doesn't stop grifters from pushing that idea. And when an idea is lifted on top of the algorithm, people will fall for it if there is no one to challenge it. And now the fact that there are people in their congregations, and in the following of Christian nationalists who are themselves telling them, don't identify as a Christian nationalist, lets us know that not only our efforts, because there's far more people working on this than just me, but all of our collective efforts have seeped into the mindset of the Christian evangelical, particularly the white evangelical community. And what good does that do? Well, if nothing else, it fractures their ability to organize around the most hate-filled version of Christianity, unchallenged from their own community of otherwise hate-filled Christians. These are not people, the people that Lance was talking about in this clip. These are not people who are going to align with us and organize with us, who are complaining about Christian nationalism to him. No, these are people who otherwise would go along with every single thing that Christian nationalists want. They simply do not want to be labeled a Christian nationalist because of the negative connotation. And that, my friends, is exactly how we have to fight against this propaganda. That's how we fight back against the propaganda. All we have to do is continuously expose the truth about their hate-filled ideology, and that will not leave them a single place where they can hide in their own minds, let alone in an organized fashion, and think that they're actually good people. They cannot hide behind the label of being a good, God-fearing Christian when their ideology is directly linked to violence, hatred, vitriol, and bigotry. But they could very easily do it if no one was pushing back against it, if no one was sounding the alarm. And I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you for helping us. We're so far, I think we're at 3-4 million views on the videos that we put out. I've had the opportunity to speak with I have to count up how many churches I've spoken with. I'm also in conversations right now with a couple of organizations that represent tens of thousands of churches, particularly black churches, who are keenly aware and have been keenly aware of the threat that Christian nationalism poses, but they did not necessarily call it by name. They understood the threat that white evangelicals pose just out of their sheer racism, but the threat that Christian nationalism posed, they had to see it. They had to really see the danger that these people pose to society. And we've been able to speak to quite a few of them. And I want to thank the patrons, our newest patrons, for joining in on that fight. I want you to listen to this next clip from Christian nationalist Lauren Boebert as she discusses the second coming of Christ. And I want to discuss how this idea has become the justification for allowing corporations, politicians, and hate-filled bigots to get away with anything they want to get away with because they believe Jesus is coming back to fix everything.
As you see the end draw near, we know that we are in the last of the last days. But it's not a time to complain about it. It's not a time to get upset about it. This is a time to know that you were called to be a part of these last days. You get to have a role in ushering in the second coming of Jesus. How cool is that?
Now, there's any number of problems with the clip that we just listened to. But the one that is most frightening is the idea that is in the subtext of her conversation. And not just her conversation, but this is the belief system of every white nationalist, Christian nationalist, every white evangelical. They believe that they have no responsibility to try to fix the problems of our time. In fact, many of the things that they believe they are supposed to do to usher in the second coming of Christ are all destructive. But because they feel like it is the precursor to the second coming of Christ, they can get away with it. The simplest way to understand is if you ask a single Christian nationalist what they believe about preserving this planet, they will say Jesus is coming back, so we don't have to worry about that. Well, my friends, let's say Jesus is coming back, but may not be back for 5,000 years. Well, we can rest assured that if we follow the ideology of conservatism, MAGA, Christian nationalism, that the human species will not be here. Something as simple as that. This is the logic. It is a fatalist ideology. It is a death cult that wants to do all of the very worst things, right? We're not talking about them trying to fix Earth so that when Jesus comes back, Jesus will find a planet that is more like him. Loving poor people, making sure that there's no homelessness, no poverty, making sure that the oceans are not on fire, making sure that there's not endless wars going on. No, these are people who want to exacerbate every single one of those problems. And when you ask them about being good stewards, like, aren't we supposed to protect this planet? Aren't we supposed to, protect and care for our brother and sister and non-gender conforming individual? They're simply going to say, well, Jesus is coming back and we don't have to worry about that. That is not only irresponsible, but it is extremely dangerous. And it is a get out of jail free card for their consciousness, for their sense of morality. They believe that they can get away with anything as so long as they wrap it in the veneer of Jesus' second coming. This is a threat to everyone and everything. Because we've already seen the extent to which these people they are willing to use violence. They are willing to overthrow democracy. They have no regard for the planet. They have no regard because they think Jesus is coming back to fix it. Well, my friends, what if Jesus doesn't come back for 10,000 years? We have been waiting. Christians have been waiting on the second coming of Christ since Christ left. And so they're gambling. Well, first of all, let me put it like this. I don't think they actually believe. I don't think for 1 second they actually remotely believe in Jesus outside of the ability to use him as a political bludgeoning tool. I've got a whole lot more to give you, but let me pause the conversation on Christian nationalism here because I want to take a quick break and thank our patrons. www.patreon.com/the BPD show. We can't do this without you. When we come back, I want to discuss Ukraine, the counteroffensive, but more specifically, the difficult spot, the victory that is occurring in Ukraine places the propagandists, Putin's propagandists, particularly here in the United States. We'll be back right after this.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
And here we go. Very special thank you to all of our newest patrons. It's been a while since we had a patron party, but I have to thank Emo Dragon. Thank you for becoming a patron. Human People Person. Thank you for becoming a patron. Oberon. Thank you for becoming a patron. Robert Newton. C. Carson. Thank you for becoming a patron. Christopher C. Thank you for becoming a patron. And Tanira N. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. You too can support everything that we're doing, both the show as well as the organizing, by going to patreon.com/The BPD Show and becoming a part of our patron family today. We have patron parties. We have different, there's a whole community over there. Patreon.com/The BPD Show. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Since we've been gone, Ukraine has launched a counteroffensive against Russian forces occupying the country since the start of the Russian invasion. They have taken back almost as much land in the last 2 weeks as Russia got in the last 5 months. The images that came out of Ukraine shows a complete and total disaster for the Russian military. For those, and I have to, let me pause here because I want to make sure everyone understands when I have these conversations, I do not revel in the demise of human life, no matter where it's coming from. In fact, it's infuriating to think of all these tens of thousands of young Russians who have died as a result of Putin's ego. And so while I celebrate the victory for Ukraine, it is hurting to realize that it's coming at the expense of all these lives. Now, no one's innocent in this. No one. So it's not a question of innocence. It's a question of unnecessary death. And that is what's happening because of Putin's imperialist ambitions, where those ambitions have gotten quite a rude awakening in the wake of this counteroffensive. The images that are coming back from Ukraine showing hundreds of Russian tanks abandoned or destroyed, ammunition and stockpiles, supplies being left because Putin's troops had to evacuate so quickly as a result of the counteroffensive. It really has shown that Vladimir Putin, who took the last 20 years to create this persona of being a menacing threat who can do whatever he wants to do, that image started to crumble. It's been crumbling throughout the entirety of this war, but certainly in the last counteroffensive, it's become clear that Russia really was not prepared for a modern war. My baseline with Russia was they have nuclear weapons and that is their ultimate line of defense. But because they decided to go on the offense in a conventional war, their tanks did not match up to commercial drones. And so the entire image of this menacing Putin, who has the ability to do whatever he wants to on the international stage, that has begun to crumble in a very spectacular way that has shaken the confidence of even the hardliners in Russia. And this has strengthened the position of the anti-war activists in Russia. More people are speaking out from within Russia right now today as a result of that counteroffensive. Well, this puts the Putin propagandists in America in a very dangerous spot, a very difficult, not dangerous so much, but very difficult spot, because how do you now, what is going to be your position now? That Ukraine should still surrender as a way to peace? Because that was the prevailing argument, that Ukraine should not withstand the might of Russia because it's going to cost Ukraine so many lives. Well, no, the lives that are being cost, majority lives are being lost on the side of Russia. And Ukraine has shown the ability to withstand. Yes, they've gotten plenty of support from the West, but this is where it becomes very interesting, because there has been a very long plan in place for this to happen. And part of that plan hinged upon no active support from the West. And how could Putin accomplish that? One of the ways was to get Donald Trump reelected. Donald Trump, who during his first term did everything he could to weaken NATO. That would have been a give me to Russia. If Donald Trump was in the White House right now, Ukraine would have fallen. And so we see now with the report coming out with Russia investing about $300 million globally to influence, and this is something that just came out yesterday, to influence campaigns, and some of those dollars came to the United States of America. But I think even more so than just straight cash influence has been the influence, the ideological influence that Putin's plan has had on the American left because of the, and globally, just the left in general, the anti-war left that stood so fiercely against George Bush in 2003 and his build-up to attack Iraq. That anti-war left has been neutralized in this moment. There haven't been any mass protests, especially in the United States, against Vladimir Putin's push, because there's a faction of the American left that wanted Vladimir Putin to win, because their route to utopia is through the overthrow of the United States of America. Let's just get to it. And so this presents a problem for them, because now what is going to be their argument? That the path to peace is going to be, I know I've already said this, but I just want to bring this to your attention. They have no argument anymore, because the path to peace right now as it stands is is where it has always been. For Vladimir Putin to take his troops out of the sovereign nation of Ukraine and go back home. That was always the way to peace. The way to peace was for this war to never have launched. Vladimir Putin, launched this war. And so now he's losing the war. What is the position of the pro-Putin propagandists? The ones who have relentlessly said that the path to peace was for Ukraine to surrender. What is the argument now? The argument is still against NATO. And so they're willing to sacrifice the lives of Ukrainian people because of their beef with NATO, their beef with the United States of America, their fundamental belief that the path towards the future is the downfall of the West, the downfall of NATO, and the downfall of the United States of America. And I'm sorry, if your path to peace involves a complete and total global war, then I don't think you understand the definition of the word peace. And they certainly don't understand international relations. And they are most certainly not genuine in their arguments. If they were genuine in their arguments, it would become crystal clear that this red-brown coalition that they have been trying to build for years, this hashtag MAGA communism, it has always been about weakening the progressive movement, because the progressive movement was the one movement in this country that had it right on both sides of the equation, both economically and socially. And we were organizing at a level that became a threat not only to the Democratic establishment, but we became a threat to that faction of the left whose only goal is the overthrow of the United States of America. Never mind the bloodshed that requires. Never mind the complete and total destabilization of civilization as we know it. Never mind the miscalculation in terms of the ability to even accomplish it. Check out Vladimir Putin. And so it has always been aimed at one thing. We can see the results. You judge a thing by the results. All of this continuous effort from the likes of Jimmy Dore down to whatever no-name new people who pop up every week. Their goal has not been for a progressive future to emerge. Their goal has been the weakening of the American left, because that is a financially fruitful endeavor for them. Because they get clicks, because they make the money, and because some of them ideologically believe that the American left, the progressive left in this country, should be destroyed. And so they're doing their part. Well, thank goodness propaganda is not as strong as the resolve of people protecting their homeland. Thank goodness that Putin's tanks were not as strong as his propaganda here in the United States of America. And thank goodness for those of us who realize that the path to the future is not through a global war that destabilizes all of civilization and then puts it into the hands of the people who are willing to commit the most obscene acts of violence. When you enter into revolution, the people who come out at the end tend to be the most violent people, and those aren't progressives. Those are not people who are in this fight for the good of humanity. Those are people who are in this fight for the good of their bottom line, for the good of their bigotry, and for the good of their ideology. The civil war in Syria is by far the best example of how something that began as a genuine, bona fide revolution on behalf of the people turned into an all-out bloodbath between two groups of extremists, one of which is headed up by Bashar al-Assad. One last detail about this conversation, more on the academic end of international relations, the academic field of neoliberalism, which is a foreign policy belief of cooperation in the post-World War II order through institutions. Many of those institutions I have problems with, but there was a consensus that in the post-World War II order that the new global paradigm would be one of cooperation through economics and not one through war. I myself subscribe to the neo-realist paradigm in the sense that force is what prevails on the international stage. And that became, my gut was confirmed when Vladimir Putin went in. I knew Vladimir Putin would go in because he had the ability to do so and no one could stop him from going in. What I did not know was that Ukraine was going to be so badass and hold the line with the help of the West. And so, yes, in the face, and I'm speaking from the academic sense, in the face of violent aggression, which is the standard understanding of neo-realists, there was cooperation in the neoliberal international relations order. And I make that distinction because we have watered down the name of neoliberalism to mean nothing but establishment Democrats. That's not what it is as an academic study, but I digress. In the face of the neo-realist paradigm being validated, those of us who looked at Vladimir Putin and concluded that he is in fact going to invade Ukraine because he has the ability to do so because no one could stop him from invading, well, the neoliberal paradigm of cooperation and collective defense seems to have responded. Now, which one is going to bear out in the end? Well, that's for political scientists to write their papers about. And I probably might join them and submit it to a journal here, because these are interesting times to really get a grasp on what the world is supposed to look like, what it can look like, despite of what it currently looks like. Listen, thank you all so much for the support as we endeavor on this organizing and trying to turn the tide against Christian nationalism. And in my absence, shout out to Rebecca Azor and DJ Exclusive and producers Josh and Tiger for maintaining and doing the show. They're still doing the live show Tuesday through Friday. Please go over there and support them. And if you want to support what we're doing here in this push against Christian nationalism, patreon.com/the BPD show. We appreciate you and we'll see you next time.